In this video, we're going to talk about sanders. So in our shop, we have lots of different sanders, all used for finishing materials in different ways. We have quarter sheet sanders, we have oscillating sanders, we have a spindle sander, and we have some different belt sanders. So all of them are used to sand and finish material, but they all have a little bit of a different purpose. So we're going to talk about the portable ones that you use most of the time. Almost always in every project you do, you have to sand it to get it to the finish that we want before you actually apply any stain or paint or anything like that. So we have 10 quarter sheet sanders. The reason they're called quarter sheet sanders is because if you have a sheet of sandpaper, it uses 1/4 that's used on here. I'll show you how to cut that in a minute. Okay, then we have some disc sanders, or the oscillating palm sander. So this will rotate and kind of oscillate back and forth, and it kind of gives it a little bit different pattern. But we use the discs on those. They just automatically stick to the bottom. So you have a disc like this, just sticks to the bottom. You try to line up the holes so it collects the dust. Okay, so in order to use this sander, you have to have a little piece of sandpaper. One of the biggest issues people have is being able to change the sandpaper to either the grit that they need or because it's damaged and old and it just doesn't work. So this is on there very good. It's loose. You can see there's some holes in the sandpaper. So in order to take this sandpaper off, there's these little metal clamps on each side. You have to push down and up, and it releases the front. The other side, you go down and away from it, it will release the bottom. So I'm going to replace this piece with a new piece. So this little jig right here has a saw blade on the side, and it's designed to cut this sandpaper into the exact size that we need. So if there is no sandpaper in the size that you need, and there are sheets, you're going to put this in our jig, push it down up against it. I kind of hold the saw blade with my fingers, and then I pull, and I get a half sheet. Then you can see there's another little spot up here. You're going to slide that half sheet into there. Cut that. I now have 2 pieces of quarter sheet sandpaper that I can use. So we're going to put this back on the sander. I usually start with the back side first. So I'm going to slide that bottom part in. And then with this pin right here, it's going to push down, clamp, and it has to go around this little plastic piece. So again, to release it, it goes above it. To get it to hold down, we need to keep it behind that little plastic piece, and it will hold it on there. Okay, then I'm going to rotate this, kind of push it all the way around. And then on this side, I have to do the same thing. So I need to make sure that little bar is going to push down on my sandpaper. So push it down, lock it into place, and now it is on there. So it is replaced, and it's pretty good. Okay, that's the quarter sheet sander. Again, if I needed a new piece for this, I can just grab a new disc and then line up the holes, push it down, and I have fixed that. All right, so here's our spindle sander. You can see it has basically a spindle and sandpaper in a big cylinder. There are lots of different sizes. You can go up to this big, but I usually keep it on small because most of the projects we do that will need this is for smaller things like this bandsaw box. I still need to sand the inside of it. Those other sanders aren't going to be able to fit, so I can put this over top of it, sand it down. I can kind of work on the edges because it's good on round things. So you can see here. I can sand the inside. I can do the outside. So that's mainly what you'll use it for. It's just small little things like that. So here is our giant belt sander we have. Again, most of our projects that we do, this is going to be way too powerful for. So we want to do something. So like if I have a piece of wood that I get some burn marks on, I want to kind of make sure that those burn marks are sanded off so it's a nice cleaner piece of wood. This is a good project to do that. This sander, again, is removing material because it's so powerful and fast. You're not really going to use this to finish your projects. This is more to try to remove material. So I'm going to remove some of this to try to get it a little bit smoother. Sandpaper is a little bit old, but you're basically always going to work from right to left because the belt spins this way. So I'm going to slide it along as I go, kind of sand it there. Alright, so where those burn marks are pretty much gone. Sometimes, depending on if the sandpaper is really old or not, you might end up getting some burn marks from this or the type of wood that you do. Okay, one thing you should never do with this sander, let's say I needed this to be cut at a certain length and it was a little bit too long. Okay, I am not going to use this sander and try to make it straight because it's almost impossible to make it perfectly straight. That I would just go back to the saw and cut. So we're not really trying to change the length on this. This is just to remove material to get it nice and smooth, like on this piece. So here's our belt and disc sander that we have. Now, there's nothing on the disc right here. But when we are using this, you can see how there's a little gap right here and a little gap right here. It is very important that you never do pieces of wood that are small enough that can get trapped in there. It's called a pinch point. That could be dangerous where it pinches and it grabs your finger and kind of pinches in there. So we always want to do big enough pieces that our hands are away from the sandpaper and that it's not getting to where that pinch point is. So those are the sanders that we have in our class. Now, all of the portable ones have a switch right here on the front. So they just turn on and off with a little switch. And then all of the stationary ones basically have a big on and off button that's attached to them that you use to turn it on and off. Again, always make sure the sanders are stopped and they're not left on, and then that they're completely stopped before you move away from them. Okay, so knowing how to use them is great, but the order that you do sandpaper in is the most important part. Okay, so in this class, we're going to pretty much finish most of our projects to 150 grit or 220 grits. So if you are aware, sandpaper comes in a lot of different grits. The most ones that we have are 60, 100 or 120, 150, there's 180, there's 220, 320, 400. And the order that you sand them will change the appearance of your project. So you always start with a lower grit. So the smaller the number, the rougher it is, the more wood it's going to take off. So if I have a couple little burn marks and I'm trying to sand them off with this and I'm using a 220 grit sandpaper, it is not going to do very well. If I'm using an 80 grit or a 60 grit sandpaper, then it's going to be removing that material faster, so it's getting rid of that burn mark, getting the fresh, nicer wood underneath. Okay, so we always pretty much will start with 80, 60, 80, or 100 grit as our first sanding. So if I'm making a cutting board, which you'll have to do later on this year, I'm going to start by sanding every side of it with 100 grit. Get it nice and smooth with that. Then I'm going to switch to 150. So I'm either going to get a different sander that has 150, or I'm going to replace the paper to get to 150. I'm going to sand everything on that. And then I'm going to switch to 220, and then I'm going to sand on that. If you skip steps, or if you go in a different order, a lot of times you can see that on your projects. You may not see it right away, but once you put that finish on it, all of a sudden it highlights that mistake of not going in the right order. Okay, so when we use sandpaper, the smallest number is always the roughest. The largest number is always the smoothest. So there are sandpapers for getting it removing material, and there are sandpapers for finishing your material. So your finishing ones are 150, 220, 320, and higher. Okay, but if you're just trying to remove it to get it smooth, if you have some glue that's left on there, then you definitely want to be using like the 60 and 100 grits to get that glue off, to get it nice and smooth. So like always, once you're finished, you got to put things away. So the disc sanders, or the random orbit sanders, we have 3 of them. They go right here. Our quarter sheet sanders, we have 10 of them, and they're going to go in here. Okay. If you need to replace the sandpaper on any of these 10 quarter sheet sanders, you're using sandpaper from this first drawer. If there's not any cut, you might have to cut some, put the leftovers in the drawer. Okay, but this drawer is the sandpaper that's only used for these sanders. If you just need a small little piece to sand by hand, you're going to grab it out of the bin. You're not going to take the sandpaper from here. So again, this drawer is only for the quarter sheet sanders right here.